Hello, I'm Jeff Paur, Senior Editor with RealTime Fantasy Sports, and welcome to another edition of the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. It is time for hot plays, fades, and sleepers for Week 5 of the fantasy football season. I am joined by my son, Henry Paur, once again. Henry, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Always a great time.
Always fun talking with you. Always fun to do this video. Start Week 5 this week. Before we get into the hot plays, fades, and sleepers, let's remind everybody the buys start this week.
Yes, they do.
The dreaded buys. Teams on a buy: Detroit, Tennessee, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles Rams. Starts with a bang a little bit, huh?
That's the Chargers.
Oh, that's Chargers. I'm sorry. And the Chargers. So, 4 pretty good teams. I mean, Philadelphia, Detroit, those are some marquee fantasy players.
Let's say 3 good teams.
Oh,
We'll leave Tennessee out of that.
Will Levis can get stronger and be ready to start the next game. We'll see what they do there. Who knows if they'll be Mason Rudolph or not.
At this point, I don't know what you do.
I don't know either. But regardless, you got to prepare for these buys. So you have Detroit, Philadelphia off no Amon-Ra St. Brown, no Saquon Barkley, no Jalen Hurts, no Jameson Williams, no both great running backs in Detroit. So it's a tough one to start with, but I actually would rather get them out sooner than later.
Yes, I would too. Because I know there's a couple ones that are week 12 and 14. I think there's some pretty key teams in that one too. And that hurts. Like, I have a lot of Philly players in leagues. I'm happy it's now because I know what's going to happen. I have them now rest of the year, just 1 week early on.
Get it out of the way. So just a reminder, again, there's 4 teams on a bye. Also, there's an early London game this week. Mm-hmm. It is New York, Minnesota, New York Jets. I should preface that. So that's an early game. Make sure you have your lineup set for those players. It starts at 9:30 East, 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern, I believe. Mm-hmm. So it's bright and early for everybody. It's fun, though. I like to watch those London games just because you get to see more football.
Yeah, it's always great. And we have the Jets, the new future home with Devontae Adams. Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, could be good for his fantasy value to make a move. I still am kind of torn with the Jets. I mean, obviously you got the great rapport with Aaron Rodgers, so that's a huge plus. But still, I don't love that offense.
And it'd get better if you had him in it. It's more to
guard. That's true. See what happens there. So it's definitely a situation.
Next thing you know, they'll sign Randall Cobb.
Yeah, exactly.
Him, Lazard, and Rodgers.
Be a big Green Bay reunion. All right, let's get into these hot plays, fades, and sleepers now. For Week 5, we'll start with the QB position. We'll give you a QB, running back, receiver, and tight end for the hot plays. Then 3 fades, and then 2 sleepers at random positions. So we'll start with QB, hot play. Who's your quarterback hot play?
I have Justin Fields of the Steelers. Now, he had his best week of the year last week against the Colts. He now gets the Cowboys, who are going to be missing probably maybe their 2 best players on defense, Lawrence and Micah. So it's very weak on that defensive line. They haven't been good against the run all year, so he should have a good day running the ball as well. We've seen him get a bunch of rushing touchdowns so far this year, so he should continue that. They have to be able to throw the ball. Their secondary is very weak, as we've seen, outside of Trayvon Diggs. I think Fields is another great game in this one. We see more of that Chicago Fields we saw a little bit in 2022.
I like Fields as well. I'm going to say Brock Purdy is my quarterback hot play. His fantasy stats haven't really been off the charts this year, but pretty solid. He has at least 18.5 fantasy points, 3 straight games, thrown for at least 288 yards all 3 of those games. The roster's getting healthy. I know Kittle's banged up once again, but still, Ayuk's back, Samuel's back. Juwan Jennings has been playing very well. Jordan Mason's been good as also. So I think Purdy's set up for a big game this week against the Cardinals. They allow the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Just got burned by Washington's offense and passing game last week. I think Purdy has a big game, his best one of the season in this matchup. All right, Henry, let's talk about running back hot plays. Who do you got there?
I have DeAndre Swift. He finally had his good game last week. It took him 3 weeks. Most people probably benched him last week. Let's be honest. I know I did a couple leagues, but he's got Carolina now. He just coming off his best game of the year. He looked very involved. They said they're going to use Roschon Johnson, where he did get a touchdown. But Swift took over in that second half. He looked like a completely different player. Looked like that Philadelphia side of him. And I think he's going to have another great game this week with a great matchup against Carolina.
So, obviously, we like the running backs in this matchup because I'm going with the other one. I like Chuba Hubbard in this matchup. Hubbard, I think he's becoming a must start. He got off to a slow start in Week 1, but he has 2 straight games with 20-plus fantasy points. Also has 120-plus total yards each of those 2 games. Panthers offense coming alive with Andy Dalton at the helm, much better. And he gets the Bears this week. They allow the 10th most fantasy points of running backs. I think Hubbard's going to be a great play this week as a low-end number 1 fantasy back. All right, let's talk about the receiver spot. Who's your hot play there?
I have Amari Cooper. I know he has been the best this year. He had an 80-yard touchdown called back last week. But he gets Washington this week, who's dead last against receivers. We've seen a lot of receivers break out against Washington so far this year. We saw Chase do it week 3. We saw Marvin Harrison had a good game last week. We saw Godwin and Evans week 1. I mean, they've been so many great games against Washington, and I think Cooper continues this. I know it's Cleveland's offense, but Cooper's still proven to be a great receiver in the NFL. I think he'll continue a dominance here against Washington.
All right, I'm going to go with a rookie for my receiver hot play, and it's Brian Thomas. I think he's been pretty much the only bright spot in an erratic Jaguars offense to start the year. He has double-digit fantasy points 3 or 4 games. He's in the top 15 of fantasy receivers right now. He's top 20 fantasy points last week, scored his second touchdown of the season. He has 9 targets each of his last 2 games. He's getting a lot of work, super talented. Goes against the Colts. They allow the 7th most fantasy points to receivers this year. They've really started to struggle defensively to start the season. I think the Jaguars are going to have to throw the ball if they want to beat this team. They're at home, haven't won yet. It's going to be a big game for them if they want to help their coach keep their job at this point.
Yeah.
So give me Brian Thomas to have a big game in week 5. All right, let's go tight end now. Who's your hot play there?
I have Zach Ertz. He's been very consistent so far this year at a position that has been very good at all. He's getting around 8 to 10 points per week. And at this point for a tight end, you'll take that this year with how they've been. Jane Daniels seems to like him a lot. I think the red zone targets are starting to come. He got the 2-point conversion last week. He got the same amount of targets. He's getting the same amount of work. It's just a matter of fact of when those touchdowns are going to start coming, because they will. Yeah, we know teams love to target the tight end in the red zone, and I think they're going to start to do that this week as they did at the 2-point last week. I think Zach Ertz is a good game against Cleveland this week.
I like Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers. I was kind of surprised when I looked at this, but he's really been playing the most snaps at tight end over Luke Musgrave. I know a lot of people worried about Musgrave there, but Kraft played 86% of the snaps last week at tight end compared to 33% for Musgrave. He had a really good game too, Kraft. 6 catches, 53 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. Jordan Love's return was a big positive for Kraft in that passing game. Again, the tight end position has been a mess. I think Kraft's going to be a good play going forward. He's been getting a lot of work, a lot of playing time. Los Angeles also, his opponent this week, the Rams, allowed the 7th most fantasy points at tight ends, really struggled defensively much of the season all year long. So I think Kraft's going to have a big showing in week 5. All right, let's talk about the opposite end of things now, Henry. Fades. Some players we don't like this week. Who's your first fade?
I'll start with Brian Robinson. The 1 week he's played a good run defense so far this year. He was bottled up pretty well against the run. He had 40 yards. He did get in the end zone, but he did have that low yardage and catch any pass out. It was 3 against Cincinnati. Now it's Cleveland, who is top 5 against the run this year. And I could see him getting bottled up in this one. He's already banged up. He didn't practice start the week with a knee injury. I think he'll probably end up playing, but I'd be worried about the production value you're going to get in this one.
I'm shocked to say this. He's never made my cold list or my fade list ever in the history of me doing these articles, videos, whatever. But this is where we are, and it's Patrick Mahomes. I understand if you can't bench him, totally understand. His ceiling is very high, and his floor is not bad either. It's just he hasn't had very good games at all this year. He has not reached 20 fantasy points in a single game. He's 15th overall in fantasy quarterback scoring. Another receiver of his went down last week, Rashee Rice. We're still waiting to see exactly what he's dealing with, but it could be a season-ending injury. They're just all beat up at receiver. It's Travis Kelce and then a bunch of other guys, and it's hard to bet against Mahomes, but I think if you have better options this week, I would consider using them, especially with the game against the Saints. They allowed the 8th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, a good defense. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game against them this week. So, again, it pains me to say this, but if you have better options, I actually would consider using them over Patrick Mahomes. Kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is a little crazy, but that's where we're at right now in this year.
Exactly. All right, let's talk about another fade for you, Henry.
I have both the Tampa running backs. It seems like we're kind of splitting work here still, and it's not really, we don't really know what's happening still. They have Atlanta this week, top 10 against the run. I can see them both getting bottled up in this one. I saw Bucky Irving had a decent game last week, but they were up pretty big, I'm pretty sure, in that game. Yeah, they played Philly. They were up pretty big in that one. White seemed to be involved to start, kind of trailed off a little bit, it seemed like. I don't really know what's going to happen in this one against a good run defense. I could see them both having pretty poor games. Maybe one gets in the end zone, but I'd be a little worried about these two.
I agree. It's tough to play them when they're splitting work like that and they're against a good rush defense. So it's a tough play. I'll give you a running back I don't like for this week. It's Zach Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals. He's actually been very solid all season, at least 14 fantasy points, 3 or 4 games, found the end zone 3 of those games as well. But his yardage numbers have not been good. He has fewer than 60 rushing yards every game. Chase Brown had a big game last week, scored 2 touchdowns, played his most snaps of the season, 40%. So I think Brown could start cutting into his work, especially since Moss isn't doing a whole lot on the ground. I think the red zone carries help his fantasy value more than anything, but I'm not sure he's going to score this week against Baltimore. They allow just 57.8 rushing yards per game, first overall, so I'm fading Moss in week 5. All right, who's your last fade for this week, Henry?
I have Drake London. We've seen what his floor has been early on in this season, and it's been pretty poor those first 2 weeks of the season. It was really bad. And they faced Tampa, who's been very good against receivers this year. They're top 5, I'm pretty sure, maybe 4, I think. And Tampa's poor against the run. I could see Atlanta really running heavy in this one with Bijan and Algier, and I could see them going a little away from the passing game with Kirk Cousins seems to still be coming back from an Achilles injury. We've seen London's floor, like I said. I'd be a little worried about London in this one.
I'll give you a receiver as well, and it's Jacoby Myers. So he's the number 1 receiver right now. Devontae Adams is banged up. We talked about him wanting to be traded now. He missed last week with a hamstring injury, got hurt late in the week. He's not expected to play again this week, so that means Myers is the number 1, which is good news for him. But even last week in that role, he had 5 catches for just 49 yards, got his looks, didn't produce a whole lot. And now this week, he faces Denver and Patrick Surtain. He's been unbelievable against the team's opposition number 1 receiver, so I do not think that bodes well for Myers at all. I could see him struggling. Denver allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points to receivers, and I think Surtain's going to bottle him up. I would not want any part of Myers in this matchup. All right, Henry, let's talk about sleepers, couple under-the-radar plays. These are guys you actually really could consider using this week, especially with the bye week starting, so give me your first sleeper.
I have Josh Downs of the Colts. He plays Jacksonville this week, who just got torched by Houston. I think Nico Collins had like 12 catches for like 160 yards. Downs coming off his best week of the year, second week back from injury. He had 8 catches for around 80-some-odd yards and then a touchdown. I know a lot of it had to do with Flacco. We don't know who's starting yet for the Colts.
I think Flacco's going to start.
If Flacco starts, then I think Downs is a great play. Flacco loved him to target him. And even if Richardson plays, I think Downs could still be a good play. It seems like he's really getting more snaps as these games are going on, as he's getting more healthy, taking over Donnie Mitchell's role. And they're targeting him a lot. We saw what he did last year, and I think Downs is primed for another good game against Jacksonville this week.
All right, I'm going to give you a tight end for my first sleeper because it's been such a fickle position, just not easy to use. And it's Cade Otton with the Tampa Bay Bucks. Otton had just a catch in week 1, but he has double-digit fantasy points each of his last 2 games. He has 13 receptions for 99 yards on 17 targets those last 2 games. He gets the Falcons this week, who allow the 9th most fantasy points to tight ends. It's not been a good position this year, but I think Otton can play well in this matchup. If you're looking for a tight end to give you a spark, maybe you have Mark Andrews. He's driving everybody crazy. I would play Otton over him for this week. All right, who's your last sleeper for this week, Henry?
I have Mike Williams. He had 4 catches for 67 yards last week against who'd they play? The Broncos, and pouring down rain. It's like neither team could throw the ball. But this week they are going to throw the ball in London, it seems like. It's Minnesota, who's been not the best against the pass. They just got torched in that second half of that Green Bay game. I know they still won the game. But Mike Williams, he's playing more snaps. He's getting healthy from the ACL injury. And he's going to be a good weapon in this offense. I think they're going to use him more until they get Devontae Adams in a couple weeks, it seems like. But till now, I think Mike Williams is a great play.
They got to push the ball down the field, take more chances, too. That offense is just too one-dimensional with dump-offs and short passes, so I think it makes sense to get Williams involved. All right, I'll give you a receiver for my last sleeper also, and it's Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills, the rookie. Khalil Shakir's banged up. He has an ankle injury, did not practice on Wednesday. I think he's iffy to play. If he doesn't play, that means Coleman's snaps could go up even more. But last week, he played the most snaps of any receiver for the Bills, 73%. Numbers aren't great, but decent. For the season, has at least 8 fantasy points, 3 or 4 games. Texans, who they play this week, have allowed 270-plus passing yards, 3 or 4 games. So I think Coleman could be a sneaky play for this week, especially with Shakir banged up. All right, Henry, that's our big preview for this week. Appreciate you coming on as always.
Yeah, no problem. I always have a great time on this.
Yeah, and good luck to you in all your games as well. It should be a fun week. Week 5, like I mentioned, 4 teams on a bye, got a London game. No two Monday games though, so that's always
Yeah.
fun too. I like that, but
Yeah.
just one Monday night game this week as well. So get those lineups in early with everything going on, and good luck to you this week. I appreciate everybody watching and tuning in to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. Good luck in all those games. This has been Jeff Paur with RealTime Fantasy Sports.